Morning scripture reading is taken from Psalms 10. That's Psalms 10, verses 1 through 18. And in my Bible it says, as a subscript, the ways of the wicked. And I'll be reading from the New King James. Why do you stand afar off, O Lord? Why do you hide in times of trouble? The wicked in his pride persecutes the poor. Let them be caught in the plots which they have devised. For the wicked boast of his heart's desire. He blesses the greedy and renounces the Lord. The wicked in his pride countenance does not seek God. God is not in his thoughts. His ways are always prospering. Your judgment are far above, out of his sight. As for all his enemies, he sneers at them. He has said in his heart, I shall not be moved. I shall never be in adversity. His mouth is full of cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue is trouble and iniquity. He sits in the lurking places of the village. In the secret places he murders the innocent. His eyes are secretly fixed on the helpless. He lies in wait secretly as a lion in his den. He lies in wait to catch the poor. He catches the poor when he draws him into his net. So he crouches, he lies low, that the helpless may fall by his strength. He has said in his heart, God has forgotten. He hides his face. He will never see. Arise, O Lord. O God, lift up your hand. Do not forget the humble. Why do the wicked renounce God? He has said in his heart, you will not require an account. But you have seen for you observe trouble and grief to repay it by your hand. The helpless commits himself to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and of the evil man. Seek out his wickedness until you find none. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations have perished out of his land. Lord, you have heard the desire of the humble. You will prepare their hearts. You will cause your ear to hear, to do justice to the fatherless and to the oppressed. And the man of God and the man of the earth may oppress no more.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Stoney, for that reading. That's probably the longest one I've ever asked anybody to read. So if there was a belt, like they have on wrestling, one of the big belts, you'd be wearing the belt, But thank you very much for reading that. Children are born with this innate desire to communicate, but they're also born with the inability to do so. Not very well. Now, parents, when Lydia came along, and I use my daughter quite often, and so I'll have to take a whooping after this is over, I guess. But it's not such a bad thing. When Lydia was born, by the time she was about a year old, I could tell you almost what cry meant what. If she was hungry, I knew what that sounded like. If we needed some diapers changed, I knew what that sounded like. If we were just generally uncomfortable, I knew what that sounded like. And you kind of tune in to those kinds of things. You get to hear those. And you have to spend time around a child to understand that. You got to learn that process. But kids can't come out and say, well, I'd sure like a bottle about now. I mean, if you could imagine some newborn coming out with that, you'd probably run away scared. And you probably should. But kids struggle to communicate, and so they communicate the only ways that they can. And I can easily say that children are a blessing. They're a lot of work. especially early on. How many parents here got to sleep through the night that first year or three? You know, there aren't many, unless you got somebody else who can get up and do the work. There are a lot of things you have to attend to. And then when kids can walk, they don't just sit in their room and cry, they come get you. If there's anything that will frighten you out of a good sleep, it's a little face. Like, if you have your eyes closed and you're almost awake and you think, well, I feel weird. It feels like somebody's watching me. You open your eyes and then there's two little eyes, you know, looking right at you. You might jump or whatever. But the thing about children is they have so many blessings that they bring with them. And it's not just children that are healthy. It's any child that comes along. I've seen so many kids that bring so much. Laura had some good, a young lady she went to school with. We were living in St. Louis. They came through town and they were on a sort of a long vacation, and they had a child that was very sick. In fact, that child was known to be terminal. But that child was like any kid I've ever seen. I mean, I looked at that kid and I said, no, I knew that the diagnosis was accurate, but I kept telling myself it just doesn't seem real. And within, I guess, a couple or 3 years, it was within a period of time, we got word that the little boy had passed away. And I thought to myself, how horrible that must be, first of all, for the parents. What they must have gone through, and how much they obviously love this child. I look at our world today, and to be honest with you, we have lost our way. And I'm talking about humanity. We give away things that are valuable, and we will pay with our own lives to get things that are worthless. We've lost a sense of priority and direction. And so as a result, we worship gods like convenience, pleasure, comfort. And we forget that life is about living, and about serving, and about protecting, and about maintaining things as important that really are important. I thought it was amazing. I think it was the University of Virginia where this first occurred. I could be wrong about the exact procedure, but it was in utero, and it was like a heart repair on a child that wasn't born yet. And I thought, wow. In fact, Dr. Ben Carson was one of the people who was known in pediatrics as one of the great pediatric surgeons, and was known to have the ability to help children through surgical procedures. But let me ask you this, going back to our original thought. What do we do with unwanted people? What do we do? And let's just face it, that's the way some people see folks. Unwanted. And if you take a child that's not born yet, and I'm not going to buy into the concept of fetus versus child and have that whole debate, because if we're going to talk in a minute about development, I'm going to throw some statistics at you, but I want you to understand something. Everything I'm going to tell you statistically is founded in scientific study. It's not something I'm making up while I'm sitting up here. These are things that are readily accepted and considered scientific without question. So, what do we do with the unwanted? And this is a great principle. Because I'm going to tell you, it's not just about the concept of what we do with the unborn. It's about what we do with people in life. What do we do with the unwanted? Sometimes it's easy to just try to dismiss them, to try to get rid of them. And I've mentioned, to my own shame, the state I was born in, and it's not the first state to issue this concept, but it's becoming one with a great more emphasis, and that is children that are born being executed within a certain time frame and then calling it abortion. That is horrible. The concept ought to chill us. It ought to cause us, me to even say it brings up emotions within me, not to mention biblical and scientific fact. But the truth is that when we talk about these, this is the way people think. Everything is about what's convenient for me. Well, I've got news for everybody in this room and everybody in the world who may be listening to this sermon. You may not know this, but life is not about you. Everything that comes to my presence is not about me. Everything that I am blessed with is not given to me so that I can lord it over or use it as power over someone else's life. In fact, it's quite the opposite. If I am blessed with a blessing or given strength, it is to do what? To take care of those who don't have those things. Years ago, and it wasn't all that long ago, I better turn on my flicker here. There was a young lady who was in a convalescent home, and her story stuck in my heart and mind because I knew of another young lady who was just like her. She was just an example of a circumstance that gained national attention. I'll start off by telling you about the one young lady I knew. We used to do a church service on Sunday afternoons in a nursing home. And in most nursing homes, the average age of the person is 70, 89 years old. They're older folks who are no longer able to live on their own. Occasionally, you will find people who are quite young, but for one reason or another find themselves in need of constant care. And so they find themselves in that same environment. And there was a young lady, when I would hand out the Lord's Supper, we'd go to this home, we would lead singing, we would have a full sermon. There was no such thing as a devotional there. They wanted a full sermon because that was their day. And we did the Lord's Supper and those kinds of things. The only thing we didn't do was take up a contribution, which I was glad we did. But this young lady was sitting in the chair, and the first time I had seen her, I could tell that she had a nurse right behind her. And when I served the Lord's Supper, the nurse took the bread, and she placed it on the tongue of this lady because she was a quadriplegic. She couldn't move her arms, she couldn't move her legs. She could look at you and smile, and she could understand every word you were saying. But she just was immobile due to an accident in her life. When she was about 30 years old, she was in a car accident. She came out of that accident as a quadriplegic. She had 3 kids and a husband. And so I saw her there, and I began to talk with her, even though she couldn't respond to me, really. But the nurse could tell that, we were talking, and she asked me, she said, "Why do you talk to her?" And I said, "Well, because she understands me. She's a person. I hope you talk to her." She said, "We do." She said, "But most people don't because they just kind of dismiss her, don't they?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, maybe it's about time for that to change." And I said, "What kind of interaction does her family have with her?" And she said, "Well, her husband rarely comes by to see her, and he refuses to bring the kids to see her." Now, there's a lot of consideration in a circumstance like that, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know everything there is to know about bringing a child to see a quadriplegic parent who was formerly fully mobile, and what that means when that parent can't respond verbally and those kind of things. But this is what happened. That husband found himself a girlfriend, moved in with her, still married, by the way, to this woman in a wheelchair because the woman in the wheelchair was getting a Social Security check. And he wanted his part of that, so if he divorced her, he would no longer get it. So he chose to live with this other woman and kind of reject this lady. Terry Schiavo was in a similar circumstance. It angered me the first time I ever heard about that in life, and it just broke my heart once again to hear about her circumstance. I'm going to read to you some of the circumstances around her life. Her husband no longer wanted to keep her alive. And he claimed that she wouldn't want to remain in this state. She became brain damaged, Terry Schiavo became brain damaged in 1990. Her husband was willing to keep her alive, but started court moves to have Terry's feeding tube removed a few years after receiving a large court settlement that was placed in a trust fund to pay for Terry's care. So if she passed away, what was left in the trust fund went to him. So he immediately moved to have her feeding tube removed. He also moved in with another woman. I don't understand this. Whatever happened to in sickness and health? I mean, are our vows so shallow and so meaningless anymore? And by the way, if you ask me to conduct a wedding, don't ask me to eliminate that. Because I don't. And I will not. Among some other things, but that's definitely not legal. But be that as it is, he went on. He couldn't marry while he was married to Terry, but he didn't want a divorce for the same reason in the previous situation, because he would cease to be her legal guardian and beneficiary of her settlement if she were to pass. The court battle, as you remember, was long and arduous and in the national news for the longest time. In fact, it was intervened by governors and attempted by presidents to stop this action. And what they essentially did eventually was her husband won. They removed her feeding tube, and 2 weeks later she passed. I don't know if y'all know this, but most people who stop eating, if you don't have water and you don't have food, within 4 to 5 days you'll die. Now, if you have water, you can go on for 6 weeks, maybe. See, everybody wants to be a fat man in the family. So, you know, if you're like me, well, I might be here next year sometime. Who knows? But in a normal person's case, if you're normal body weight, with water, you'll go about a month and a half. A fellow, Bill Allen, was asked by Wesley Smith in an online debate, do you think that Terry is a person? Now understand that this woman, she was in a state where she was incommunicative, and some people will make living wills, and if that's the case, then I think that's a different circumstance. But if you have a person who stands to make financial gain in a circumstance like this, it becomes very suspect. But his answer was this. He says, no, I don't think. I do not think she is. I think having awareness is an essential criterion for personhood. Even minimal awareness would support some criterion of personhood, but I don't think complete absence of awareness does. Well, if that man is in the room with you when you go to sleep, you better keep your eye open. Because we don't usually have awareness when we're sleeping, unless we wake up. I mean, the logic involved in some of these decisions is so obvious, it is painful. And for the simple fact that someone wants to hear that it's okay to do this is the reason it's perpetrated and propagated. It's got nothing to do with the truth. It's got nothing to do with the value of a life. Some years ago, I was in a position in ministry, and I was having a rough time period, and things weren't going well, and a fellow came up to me. His name was Will Thickpen. Will had barely ever spoken a complete sentence in his life. He was mentally handicapped, he had cerebral palsy, and he came up and he put his arm around me, and he hugged me up close, and he said, Lonnie, you're a good preacher. Complete sentence, total clarity, and then he went right back to the way that he was, and that is incomplete sentences, thought processes that were cyclic and rambled, and Will was my buddy. You had to get through me to get to Will. I would protect, if I could put him in my pocket and have him with me today, I would. But there are people that would see Will in the womb and say he's not worthy to live in this world. They would look at him and say he's worthless. He's going to be a drain on society. You know who's a drain on society? People who run away from the wisdom of God. That's a drain on everybody around them. For the matter of convenience. Then comes along, and had already been here, Dr., and I hesitate to use that and I don't even think you use it anymore, Jack Kevorkian. Jack Kevorkian. At the time, his thought process was, if somebody wants to die and they have a turn, and he had all these nice criteria involved, and if they have all these criteria in place, then I'll help them. Do you know why he was in prison? Because he killed people who were misdiagnosed. As good as our medical system is, as good as all of those things are, it's not 100%. Try to make it that way. You shoot for that, but it's not that way. And you walk into somebody sometimes and you tell them the C word. You know what the C word is? Cancer. You tell them that word, and the first thing somebody says is, I just hope it's over, I want to get out of here. Well, believe it or not, do you know that 80% of all cancers within the human body are cured? 80%. But it doesn't matter if you know what category is what, or what's in the most extreme category and which one is not. But you hear that about yourself, and all of a sudden your mind goes places. And then you got somebody sitting beside you with a sick mindset that says, well, we can take care of all that. Does that not sound like Satan talking to you? Just give up. Just walk away. The Netherlands became the first country to formally authorize what is otherwise known as mercy killings or euthanasia for terminally ill people. There's a list of criteria that they went by, and a lot of it is synced up with Kevorkian's. And the current law is only applied to those who are terminally ill and who is sound mind. They're looking at expanding the law to cover those who cannot make such a request. Now that'll be interesting, because that means somebody else is going to have to decide how you voluntarily die. We've come to a point where people struggle. In a book titled Practical Ethics by Peter Singer of Princeton University, killing a defective infant is not mentally equivalent to killing a person. Sometimes it's not wrong at all. At least he said sometimes, and I don't know what his exceptions are. Newborn human babies have no sense of their own existence over time. Is convenience our God now? Is it? Is it just what's okay for the moment and just, because that, I'll be honest with you, that's what happens most of the time when it comes to a subject like abortion. And this sermon's not about abortion, it's about the value of life. But this is one of the best examples of how we flagrantly walk away from that concept in our current society and in this world. There are over 1.5 million abortions take place every year. Over 1.5 million. There are some small countries that don't have a population that size. There are some states that have small Can you imagine us saying, well, we're going to kill off New Jersey every year? We're going to get rid of small states that have small Vermont, New Hampshire. We're just going to get rid of them. Every year. A number that size. An illustration would be about that concept of a woman's convenience to abort a pregnancy is more important than the life of that child who develops within her. And I'll just go on and tell you, we changed the terminology because we don't like the concept or idea of eliminating a child's life, so we call it a fetus. You can call it what you want. What did the old preacher say, Will? Ain't nobody in here but us chickens. You can call yourself a chicken, you can sit in the same house, but if you're sitting in there with the chickens, it don't make you a chicken. When is a child considered completely physiologically developed? That's one of the arguments that goes on here. Well, if the child's not developed, then it's not a child yet. Well, if that's true, the brain doesn't completely develop until the ages of 18 to 25 years old. So if that logic rings true, can we just take the life of any 18 to 25-year-old and call it done? Because they're not completely developed? Or what about the person who is an adult but is somehow mentally challenged? There are people who walk through this world that are functionally, statistically viable, but they're also literally and demonstrably what we would otherwise say mentally handicapped. So are we going to get rid of all them? Maybe we'll just get rid of all the fat guys. I would be personally especially against that. That's my genre. But maybe we'll get rid of people that wear blue shirts, or maybe we'll get people that don't look like us, don't act like us, or don't say what we want them to say. By the way, that's been tried. By the way, we fought at least 1 or 2 world wars over that kind of thinking. And by the way, like I said, I have all the studies and statistics if you'd like to see these things. But the brain is just not completely developed until 18 to 25 years old. 99.31% of abortions are for convenience. 99.31%. I don't know about you, but that's a lot. That's almost every one. Over a 20-year study, 5,460 were for the health of the mother. That's 0.36%. 3,640 were for fetal defects. That is 0.24%. And if you understand how they got to the health of the mother, understand that that was by her simply saying it. That wasn't by clinical diagnosis, in other words. In other words, if she walked in and said, well, you know, I've got gestational diabetes, which can be a very serious thing for a woman to have while she's with child. So we go on. From this study, which was from 1980 to 2000, and I've got all the list in there. The vast majority of doctors today, including abortion providers, will tell you that the health of the mother is almost nearly never a reason for aborting a child. So we talk about terms and we change the way we say things. But where does the Bible view the beginning of life? In Isaiah 49, in verse 1 and also verse 5, but I'm going to read all of them. Listen to me, O islands, and pay attention, you people from afar. The Lord called me from the womb. From the body of my mother, he named me. He has made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand, he has concealed me. He has also made me a select arrow. He has hidden me in the quiver. He has said to me, you are my servant, Israel, in whom I will show my glory. But I said, I have toiled in vain. I have spent my strength for nothing in vanity. Yet surely the justice due to me is with the Lord, and my reward with my God. And now says the Lord, who formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob back to him, so that Israel might be gathered to him. For I am honored in the sight of the Lord, and my God is my strength. One thing that is undeniable about humanity is that it takes 3 entities for a child to be created. 3. Most folks know about 2 of them. That's a mama and a daddy, a man and a woman. The third one is God. The one intangible thing that medical science struggles to determine, to define, to touch is the human soul. Where does your thought originate? Does it come from your mind? That physical organ? It's because a lot of people have minds that apparently struggle to think. And maybe they have a physiological reason. Maybe they have mental health issues. Maybe they have some other things going on. So what is that value of human life? Why is human life valuable? I'm going to shoot some ideas at you here real quick because I'm going to be running low on time, and I knew that when I started this. First of all, man is not an animal in that we are made in the image of God. Of all things in creation, man is unique in that regard. Genesis 1, verses 26 to 27. Let us make man in our image. So God formed man in his image. Secondly, God is the giver of human life. In Acts 17, verses 24 to 28, the God who made the world and all the things in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything. Since he himself gives to all people life and breath and all things, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation, that they would seek God, if perhaps they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and exist, as even some of your own poets have said, for we also are his children. Third, because of our sins, mankind is damaged goods in the sight of God. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We all need salvation. Next, he loved us. God loves us. You know, mankind is, God sees creation and sees good. God sees man and he sees love. There's a distinct difference in that relationship. And even while in sin, God still reaches out to us. He demonstrates his own love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So, what was God willing to pay for human life? 1 Peter 1, verses 18 and 19 says this. Knowing that you were not redeemed with perishable things like silver or gold from your futile way of life inherited from your forefathers, but with precious blood as of a lamb, unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. We are redeemed, folks. If you sit in this audience today and you're a member of the body of Christ, you are there because you have been redeemed. You've been purchased back. And it was at the heaviest possible cost. That's the sacrifice of a sinless Savior. People with handicaps are not, excuse me, I think I went back to the start forward. We'll wait, that may come along in a minute. I'm losing my presentation up here. In fact, go ahead and shut that down, please. I can't even shut it down from up here. People with physical handicaps or handicaps of any kind are not less valuable as people. Do you know that among those diagnosed with Down syndrome, over 90% of those children are aborted prior to birth? That's around the world. There are nations that brag about the healthy birth rate they have, and yet they select these children to abort. I don't know if you've ever worked with mentally handicapped people, if you spend any time around them, and what the case is. There are some who have great physical needs. There are some who you could sit around and talk to and spend time with and probably associate with just like you would anybody else that you might know. They come in various levels. But the truth of the matter is they're all still valuable. God has always ordered protection for handicapped people. And I hesitate to use that word. I know that's not politically correct. There are a lot of handicapable and a lot of other terms that people use, and I don't mean to be disrespectful at all. But in Leviticus 19, verse 14, you shall not curse the deaf man, nor place a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall revere your God. I am the Lord. Why would God say that? Why would he have this mindset? Why would he project that to his people? The deaf, the blind. Why would he say, you're not going to torment these people? What are you going to do for them? What are you going to have to take care of them? That's what you're going to have to do. Why? Because they bring such valuable things to me, or they do those things. But that's not what he says. What he says is because I am God. They are still made in his image. And for that kind of respect, that reason alone, we should treat people with love and with respect. James 1:27 says it's one of the evidences of a pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained from the world. You might say, well, all of that sounds like a bunch of political theory and ideas that we've heard, and you probably have heard some of it. Sadly, our legal system protects some of this activity. Everything that is legal may not be right. You need to understand that. There have been things over history that have been legal that were absolutely wrong. So, having said that, I'm not telling you to break the law, but I'm telling you that everything that's legal is not necessarily right. What do we do with children? Some would argue, they would say, especially when it comes to abortion, what about rape and incest and all these heinous things that happen? My response to that would be very simple. The damage done to that person is done in the act of violence, not in carrying that child. Now, I know that sounds to some heartless and unthinkable, but it goes back to the concept of what we do. There are people waiting in line. By the way, if you know someone who has a child that they want to carry to term, and maybe they feel that they can't take care of that child, or they want to give that child up for adoption, I want to tell you something. There are families who are waiting in line to get an infant, a newborn infant. They're not bad people. They've been checked out every possible way they can be checked out. They've been looked at. These are good, decent folks. For one reason or another, they just can't have a child. Or maybe they want to give a life to a child that would otherwise be somewhere else. But believe me, there are people waiting to take good care of children. And I also want to say this. If you sit in this audience today and you have had an abortion, I am not your judge. That is not what I'm doing, and that's not what I'm here to say. God bless you. Because I also came across in the study of this a lot of statistics that shows the damage to mothers who go through the process of abortion. And that's one thing the clinics and a lot of people who provide these services are not going to tell you. They're not going to tell you that the majority of women who go through this procedure suffer mental health disorders at hugely vast degrees for the rest of their life. They're not going to tell you that because it's their job to make the money from the procedure. You go to a Ford dealership, they don't try to sell you a Ford unless you're in a used car lot. They're not going to sell you a Chevy or a GM or something else out there, or Chrysler. They're going to sell you a Ford because that's what they sell. There are people in this world that when they stand to make money will preserve themselves. And I think this issue ought to be about something other than the economic benefit for some and the mental health severe consequences for others. It ought to be about the value of a human life. What do we do with the unwanted? I hope and pray that we will always remember their value and that we'll always strive to preserve God in this world. So this morning, I hope that when you look at things around you, when you see life and you see life in this world, that you'll see God. Does everyone act godly? No. Is there a Christian in this room that lives a perfect life? If there were, Romans wouldn't apply to us. 3:23 wouldn't apply, would it? Because it says we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So before we point fingers and say, well, I remember when Jeffrey Dahmer was baptized. And anybody who knows, I'm not even going to go into that story. He had a pretty heinous crime life. He was baptized, and I saw people, when it was announced, walk out of the church building. He did some pretty bad stuff, folks. You would say in life that what he did, you couldn't get any worse. You might do some other things level with that, but you couldn't get any worse than what he did. In terms of what a human being can do to another. But when he was baptized into Christ, the blood that washed his sins away is the same blood that washes away sins from you and me. Same blood. And it takes just as much blood for me and you as it did for him. So before I'm going to walk out on somebody else, I need to realize the gravity of my own fault. This morning, I want to encourage us all. Remember God. There are so many changes in our culture and our society right now. There are so many things that we question. I hope and pray we'll never question God. But I know many people do. I know there are a lot of people that struggle with the value of life when we think about how terribly some people treat other people. But I also hope that we'll understand that whoever the worst of us is, by your definition, whatever measure you want to use, they're still made in the image of God. And that unborn child, from that unborn child to whoever else is in this world, they contain that soul. So this morning, I pray that we'll look at ourselves, and if there's something you need to do, if you need to become a Christian, you've not made that step, you've not taken those steps yet, I would recommend you, I would encourage you to do so. And if maybe you have need for something this morning, if we could pray with you, pray for you, or work with you, please come while we stand,